Winds will slowly start to ease, and that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. And now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good evening and welcome along to Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight I'll be tackling the difficult subject of our education system, and I'll ask if it's failing our children. Was the sexual revolution good for feminism? I'll be joined by author Louise Perry, whose latest work is a new book on that very subject. Plus a report on the discovery of a sunken warship labelled Norfolk's Mary Rose. All of that and more coming up. But first, an update on the latest news from Polly.
Neil, thank you. The top stories on GB News. Clarence House says Prince Charles remains politically neutral after he reportedly described the government's migrant policy as appalling. It comes after the High Court ruled the first deportation flight to Rwanda can go ahead on Tuesday. Campaign groups are expected to appeal. But the Times newspaper is reporting that a source heard the Prince of Wales say he was more than disappointed by the policy during a private conversation. The Conservative MP John Whittingdale told GB News the plan is sensible and meets all its objectives.
The people who will be sent to Rwanda are young males who are economically active, where there is a shortage in Rwanda. There is not in this country. We have problems being created by the level of migration. In Rwanda, they want to have migrants, and the people trying to get to this country do so because they want to be economically active and to be able to earn money, which they will be able to do. So on the basic policy, I have no great difficulty. I think it meets a number of objectives. The court ruling yesterday, I would hope also, is a recognition that Parliament decided that it favoured this policy, and it is for Parliament to decide and not for the courts.
Meanwhile, the royal commentator Jenny Bond says Prince Charles should never be compared with the Queen.
For one, woke up this morning and saw those headlines and thought, good for you, Charles. That's just great. You've come out and you've said what you think, albeit privately, but Clarence House is not denying it. I think they would deny it if these conversations had not been had. And maybe Charles wanted his views to be known. He's a compassionate man. I know he is. He's a deep-thinking, philosophical man of great sentiment, and I think he feels strongly about this.
In other news today, the family of Sean Pinner, who was given a death sentence for fighting Russian forces in Ukraine, says they are devastated. He and another British man, Aidan Aslin, were found guilty of mercenary activities by a court in the separatist region of Donetsk. In a statement, Mr Pinner's family described it as an illegal show trial and said he should be allowed full independent legal representation. Chris Daw, QC, says the men should be treated fairly.
The truth of it is there isn't a constitution for this republic because it's not a real country. So these men really should be treated as prisoners of war. They should be treated humanely. And if they are executed, it will be an utter outrage. And I really hope that everybody in the international community will do everything they can to stop that happening.
Well, Ukraine will be finding out if it has the European Commission's support for EU membership by the end of next week. During a visit to the capital, Kyiv, the Commission's president, Ursula von der Leyen, told President Zelensky more work still needs to be done to fight issues like corruption. The executive's backing would be the first step to joining the EU. All 27 members, though, will have to approve the move. Here, critics of the government's food strategy for England have described a leaked draft as a half-baked blueprint that's flatter than a pancake. They're concerned key recommendations from a major review are being ignored, including the introduction of a salt and sugar tax to help transform the nation's diet. Campaigners also accused ministers of goading farmers into producing more meat. The white paper is expected to be published on Monday. The mother of a boy with severe epilepsy is urging manufacturers to help struggling families access medical cannabis. Charlotte Caldwell says dozens of people have to pay privately to get a prescription at a time when the cost of living is soaring. She says those aged 18 or under can access treatment, but older children are being forgotten.
These mothers and fathers that are nursing them are absolutely exhausted, and they are having to budget really tightly simply because the cost of living crisis that we're in now has really took a grip on them. So I would like to appeal to Sajid, the Health Secretary, to extend RESCAS for these forgotten children over 18.
And lastly, interest rates for student loans are to be capped for a year to protect against soaring inflation. Borrowers were facing a 12% rate at the end of this summer, but from September, that's being cut to 7.3%. The Department for Education says it's the largest scale reduction of student loan interest rates on record. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Neil Oliver Live.
The question is this: are we stupid, or are we just being treated as if we're stupid? How long will they keep trying to tell us 2 + 2 = 5, when so many of us can see that the answer is plainly 4? Spanish newspaper El Mundo and other news agencies reported last week that Jose Maria Fernandez Sousa Faro, president of European pharmaceuticals giant PharmaMar, was among 2,200 Spanish elites and celebrities investigated by police for allegedly paying thousands of euros to be injected with a saline solution, salt water, instead of any of the COVID vaccines, and so had their names added falsely to the National Immunisation Registry. This alone is a brewing scandal of note. That a company president involved in researching COVID vaccines allegedly and at the very least did not feel it necessary or important to get vaccinated should make us ask another question. Did that big pharma boss think or have reasons to believe that the vaccines were unsafe perchance? Hey Jose, why go to all the trouble and expense of dodging the jab when everyone else in the world is being told by your lot and the rest that it's safe and that, no one's safe until everyone's jabbed? What's the problem, Jose? I, for one, would like to know the answer to that question. Maybe while we're on the subject, we might pause and wonder who else among the great and the good may have chosen to dodge the bullet and take the saline instead. Daily Mail Online carried a headline on the 8th of June. Healthy young people are dying suddenly and unexpectedly from a mysterious syndrome as doctors seek answers through a new national register. This is SADS, an acronym that stands for Sudden Adult Death Syndrome, and according to the Royal Australian College of GPs, it occurs most commonly in people under 40. This is properly scary, I don't mind telling you. Healthy young people are going to their beds of an evening and not waking up ever again, or otherwise going about their everyday business and dropping dead for no identifiable medical reason. The best anyone in the health professions can apparently do is describe it as mysterious, baffling even, that there are people under 40 dropping in their traces for no known cause. At the same time, around the world, there have been reports of many hundreds of sportsmen and women dying suddenly and unexpectedly in the past year. Super fit individuals, uniquely focused on their own health, keeling over dead, often on the field of play. Here at home, we have had updated information campaigns about how important it is to be aware of the incidence of heart attacks and strokes. It has been deemed appropriate to remind us as well that heart attacks are not unknown in children. It's almost as if we're not to be unduly alarmed by the sight of passers-by dropping to their knees and clutching at their chests. Elsewhere, there's a poster campaign about a rise in the number of cases of shingles. The small print on the posters mentions shingles may strike people with lowered immune systems. Fancy that. Deaths have been attributed by coroners to the COVID vaccines. The numbers are disputed, but people have died on account of the jabs. That much at least is undeniable. Around the world, there are millions of cases of alleged adverse reactions to the jabs, lives severely compromised in some cases. I won't get into the numbers because those are always disputed too, but the facts remain. People are dying. The elephant in the room here is the COVID-19 vaccines. And again, I make no apology at all about banging on about this topic week after week. The push to move on, to leave all talk of COVID and pandemic behind us is palpable and I would say downright sinister. I'm nowhere near ready to move on. Not while there is still so much we do not know, so much we're not allowed to say, think and ask. We're told all about COVID-19 and all manner of ways in which it might affect health long after a person has recovered from the initial infection. But as well as the pandemic, the other momentous arrival among us, indeed in just the past year and a half, is the biggest mass vaccination campaign in the history of the world. Vaccination with products that had emergency approval, but in my opinion are experimental and for which no long-term data is available, on account of their being brand new and just out of the box. Billions of people around the world have submitted to the procedure in a coercive and bullying atmosphere created by politicians and the media that was mandatory in feel, if not in fact. Unknown and unknowable numbers of people did so simply to keep their jobs, to get on a plane and go on holiday or to a gig. And yet, in the midst of one report after another of otherwise unexplained sudden deaths in the past 18 months or so, the only emergent variable, the only new thing in the world that we're not allowed to discuss, absolutely not allowed to discuss, far less point accusatory fingers at, is the mass vaccination programme. Again, I ask the question I posed at the top of this piece. Are we stupid, or are we just being treated as if we're stupid? Which is it? We're certainly living, as the old Chinese curse has it, in interesting times. I, for one, cannot remember such a deluge of apparently unconnected events and bad news, all of it creating and maintaining a relentless anxiety and sense of impending doom. Pandemic, mass lockdowns, insistence on a climate crisis, fuel shortages, hikes in the price of fuel, energy, this, that and everything else. Threat of global famine, war in Europe and no end in sight. Talk of nuclear weapons and war. Unconstrained illegal immigration, inflation, rising interest rates, unsustainable national debt, quantitative easing gone out of control like a runaway train. And all the while that lot is ticking over. Sudden inexplicable deaths among the young and fit, which we're not supposed to talk about, or at least not openly and in a way that takes account of all emergent and contributory factors of interest. Most recently, we've had the advent of monkeypox. A disease identified in African countries decades ago is apparently suddenly spreading around the world. More than 360 cases have already been identified in the UK. Monkeypox is routinely mentioned in the same breath as smallpox, that terrifying ghost from the all-too-recent past. For a while there, the official word was that 90% of those cases of monkeypox were in men who had had sex with other men, and that the infection was passed only by close and prolonged physical contact. Now, however, the Centre for Disease Control in the United States has said monkeypox may be airborne, like our old friend COVID-19, and that the wearing of masks might be a good idea again, just to be on the safe side. You might say, it's a basic question, but what on earth is going on here? Billionaire computer salesman Bill Gates and his cronies in the matters of world health run simulations of pandemics caused by, say, let's stick a wet finger above our heads to test the air, coronavirus and, monkeypox. And then within months, those simulations are followed by actual outbreaks of coronavirus and monkeypox. Never mind software. That Gates chap really ought to branch out into crystal balls, because the one he's been using apparently works a treat. And all the time, a constant background noise carries the message that the powers that be actually care about our health, along with the rest of our well-being. Last week brought the news as well of a proposed rise in the age when a person might buy cigarettes. That's a good one, isn't it? Hard to argue that such a move is about anything other than saving us from ourselves. Except you could also justifiably point out that this is working towards prohibition, just another brick in the wall of controlled lives. That decision is not yours to make, little human, it's ours. I was with my family in central London a couple of weeks ago, and we couldn't help but start counting the recently installed gaudily coloured shop fronts that hadn't been there the last time we walked those streets together. Willy Wonka style, offering all manner of sweets. I say we started counting, but we lost track before the end. They seem to be everywhere. I'm no health expert, as I freely declare, but those cathedrals to candies look to me like type 2 diabetes on a stick, to say the least. Consume your sugar sensibly, I'm sure those purveyors say in the small print on their products. Don't smoke, kids. Suck this instead. We're not well in the West, and in all manner of ways. Off the coast of North America, scientists are finding the fish full of antidepressants, thanks to the amount of those drugs entering the water supply via the urine of millions of medicated people. Here at home in Britain, other scientists find fish spontaneously changing sex on account of how much oestrogen is making its way into the water supply from women taking the contraceptive pill. Sperm counts are falling in British men at the same time, leading to falling fertility. But best we don't bother our pretty little heads about that one either. When you think about it, we're being walked into the eye of a perfect storm. More and more people are dropping down dead of no known cause whatever, and fewer babies are being conceived and born. That, my friends, is the road to nowhere. All of that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me as well at GBNews, and I'll try to get to some of your comments later in the show. Joining me on my panel this evening is journalist and political consultant Emma Burnell and political commentator Emma Webb. Two Emmas in a row.
It's not going to be confusing
Just to confuse
No,
the heck out of
no
you.
complications there to worry about. Welcome both. Thanks for being here. You've both been here before. Emma, I think you've been here several times. Emma Webb, to be clear, do you feel that you're being spoken to like a responsible adult or like a child?
Oh, almost never. I think that there's a kind of condescension that comes from every quarter, from from companies, from the government, from all of the powers that be. I feel constantly patronised by them. And I think that, just listening to your monologue there were certain parts where I feel very angry about many aspects of this, and one of the aspects is the fact that actually we haven't moved on. Every day I see online people of the be kind crowd, people who have be kind and pronouns in their bio and like to present themselves as really good, compassionate people, bullying people online because they've made a decision not to take the vaccine or because they believe that somebody is an anti-vaxxer, as they put it. And I just think that, that there is this attitude of ownership that we seem to be seeing from the general public and also from particular individuals in the elite, that somehow our bodies are not ours to make decisions about. And it seems to be a real infringement on our autonomy. And there's something that is almost feels grievously invasive about that. It feels like an assault on our own agency and us as sacred individuals to make our own choices. And I think, you say, do I feel like I'm being treated like a grown-up adult? But I don't think anybody is really being treated as agents who are free to make their own decisions. Everything increasingly feels extremely coercive in almost every department, not just on issues to do with public health.
Emma, on this channel, uniquely, really, Mark Stein, Dan Wooten have been talking to people damaged by vaccines or who have lost people to vaccines. Isn't it high time, and certainly before we move on, that we're entitled to have an open and adult conversation about exactly what has happened in the last couple of years?
I think talking about vaccines in an informed way is really important. I'm a believer in herd immunity and vaccination programmes. I have spent many, many years, for example, as a fundraiser for UNICEF, raising funds for children to be vaccinated around the world. I saw the near eradication of polio as part of that work. I just want to talk very briefly about a friend of mine who died from sudden adult death syndrome, someone who is incredibly important to me. He was a wonderful, incredible man, and his death had nothing to do with vaccinations. And he was a housing campaigner. He worked for the National Housing Federation for well over a decade. He was one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. He was 5 days after his 40th birthday. He was adopting a young boy. He had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met in my life, and I really miss him. And I find it very difficult to detach what I know he would have said to you from what I want to say to you as a professional.
Every death is undoubtedly a tragedy, regardless of circumstances.
I don't want to politicise my friend's death, and I find his death from sudden adult death syndrome being lumped into a cause I know he would have violently disagreed with quite hard.
Aren't we being bombarded, though? It's one thing after another. Heart attacks and strokes, information all around us, monkeypox, sudden adult death syndrome. It's one health fright after another. Now, there are obviously there are distinctions to be made, but we are being bombarded.
I think there are two things happening here. One is that medical science is more advanced than it's ever been. That's just obvious because science always advances. So our awareness has got considerably ahead, and it does come on in leaps and bounds. And we live in a very, very chaotic world. Having been in and around various sort of government departments, I've never worked for government, but I know enough civil servants. I tend to can I say cock up on telly? Rather than conspiracy notion of government, because I've never met anyone I thought was bright enough to pull off the kinds of conspiracies that it would take to have and I don't know what Bill Gates would want to kill us all off for. We wouldn't be buying his products.
If it's been a cock-up, as you say, why can't we talk about it?
We should. I have no problem, and we are talking about it. We're literally talking about it right this second. I don't think anyone's stopping us talking about it. What they're doing is disagreeing, and that's different.
Even if this is a cock-up, don't you think it's a problem that we seem to have developed this unethical culture where we know that whenever there's any kind of medical treatment, that there are always going to be pros and cons to anything. Everything pretty much has side effects. And so one of the foundational principles of medical ethics is informed consent. And so individuals have to be able to make those decisions. And we seem to have developed this culture, which I think is part of this overarching culture of condescension, where individuals have become almost infantilized and dependent on the state in so many ways that ethical protection of the sanctity of a human being's right to make decisions about their own body is being undermined. So whether these problems are being caused by the vaccine or not, whatever the case is, still people need to have the right to make those decisions. And I think a lot of the things that you pointed out there in your monologue, Neil, those were instances where I think it's quite clear that people's fears are being ramped up by things that are in the news, whether consciously or unconsciously, and things have in peaks and troughs felt increasingly apocalyptic, and that increases that feeling that you're not necessarily able to make a good, informed decision.
But Emma, if you're saying that it shouldn't be in the news, aren't you then asking for other people not to discuss things?
No, not at all.
I mean, if you want discussion, you have to have both sides. That's the important part of discussion.
What I mean is that we have to see this as a whole, and that the atmosphere of fear also has implications for people's decision-making. And so it's really important that we have a culture that respects people's right to make their own decisions. That's my only point.
And words were made difficult. Have been made difficult to use. You know, the mention of drugs like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine became taboo. Even suggesting...
I don't think it became taboo, it became laughable.
Well, that is definitely a matter of opinion, and other people would suggest a very different point of view relating to those repurposed drugs. But more than anything else, I would say that the fact that the atmosphere became mandatory in all but name, the coercion that was there for people to take the procedure or lose their jobs or not be able to move freely, that was wrong. And I would like someone to come forward and say that near mandatory atmosphere was wrong.
But you've just looked down a camera and said exactly that. So how are you being stopped from doing that?
Because it took a great deal of effort and resilience not to cave in and submit to the procedure, and that should not have been the case.
I mean, to be honest, you couldn't have got that vaccine in me fast enough. And that's fine. That was my informed decision.
Fine. That's your informed decision.
And I agree that we should have better... I mean, we're going to move on to the education system, and ways of thinking critically is actually something that I'm quite keen that we think about more. I'm also very aware of what I don't know, and I am quite happy when I know something and believe myself to be the expert in it to stamp my authority. I'm currently directing a play. There are times when my actors will try to do something I don't want them to do. It's my job to say, no, hang on, I know best on this. I'm quite happy when somebody else has done the training for me to go to them and say, you know better, tell me what the options are, and then tell me what you recommend.
Where I don't know, I demand the right to ask questions.
I'm not saying that you don't have the right to ask questions. I'm saying that other people know more than you on some things.
This is a point, though, about recognising, and this going back to the ethical point, recognising human frailty. We now have this kind of Promethean understanding of what human beings can accomplish and what human beings should be. But actually, all human beings are imperfect. And so it is right to be able to ask questions. It's important to be able to be sceptical. And I think that's part of the problem, is that scepticism is really not in vogue at the moment. And people who are sceptical, people who ask questions, are treated as if they are, for example, just the use of the term anti-vaxxer. Anti-vax has been used broadly, including to try and discredit people who are just making points, basic points about medical ethics and autonomy. And so I think that part of this is recognising that human beings make mistakes. Medical professionals make mistakes. Professionals in all sorts of life, whatever their expertise are, sometimes make mistakes. And people do have the right to ask questions without being tarred as being...
And we should have more time to ask questions. But I think there's a difference between saying we all make mistakes and I am less likely to make a mistake on a medical issue than a doctor is.
We can come back to this at the end. I think we'll have time at the end of the show to come back to some of this. After the break, in the week the University of York put a trigger warning on their archaeology courses, I'll be discussing the state of education in Britain.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Education on the one hand, academia on the other, neither appears to be a happy place at the moment, or at least neither is delivering for our young people, I would say. There were the reports earlier in the year about the rising levels of anxiety and depression reported among school pupils on account of lockdown. After 2 years of homeschooling, the necessary catch-up is even more of a mountain to climb. I'm old enough to remember when a Scottish education was something to boast about anywhere in the world. Last month came the news the UK Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi had been asked to give advice to the Scottish Government amid reports of literacy and numeracy standards in freefall in Scotland. Then last week I read about York University Archaeology Department putting a trigger warning on one of its courses, warning would-be students that they might see images of human remains. And the Theology Department at Glasgow University was warning its students that the story of Jesus Christ might be upsetting. These are just a random selection of stories that hardly show education in this country in the best light. I'm joined now by education specialist and GB News regular Tom Buick, and by Chris McGovern from the Campaign for Real Education to discuss where we are now. Good evening and welcome to you both.
Hi, Neil.
Good evening.
You hearing me? Tom, I'll come first of all to you. Is the education establishment, for want of a better word, simply failing our kids at the moment?
Well, if you look at the international evidence that's collected by the likes of the Programme for International Assessment, or so-called PISA, our education system has stagnated in 20 years. And actually, you touched on this on your introduction. When surveyed for things like life skills and life satisfaction, we come at the bottom of these international league tables. And that suggests to me, prima facie, that we're clearly letting down a generation of young people, that we're not supporting them through the curriculum in the way that other countries manage to do.
Chris, if I could come to you, have we forgotten or somehow unlearned, perhaps, how to teach basic literacy and numeracy?
We have. If we go back 30, 40 years, when our campaign for real education was set up, we were arguing then, for example, that we mustn't move away from teaching children the sounds of letters, or called phonics. And in those days, the children were being told to just recognise individual words. It was a catastrophe, and now I think all commentators recognise the importance of phonics. But yeah, things have gone backwards. We're the only, according to the OECD, the great number crunchers internationally, we're the only country in the developed world where grandparents outperform their grandchildren in basic skills. And if you go back even 70 years, Singapore, which is currently more or less at the top of the international league tables, they were basically illiterate in 70 years ago. They were 95% illiteracy. And we were way ahead. Now that we're way behind, we're about 3 years behind Singapore in standards. So is there a problem? There really is. But look, it represents a triumph for modern thinking. It represents a triumph for the educational establishment, what has been called the blob. They want this. What you're criticising on this show is what the educational establishment strives for. They see it as a triumph. We're all doing very well, according to them. They are very self-congratulatory. But in the real world, children are unhappy, and one of the reasons why they're unhappy is they're not well educated and they can't get jobs and they can't do jobs. And we're going to be competing in an international field, and our children are going to fall behind. So, yeah, we need lots of immigrants because then they could be trained up. They are better educated than our own children. So, with the arguments to and fro on immigration, we know what they are. But I will tell you one thing, we need skilled workers in this country. And if we can't train our own, we are going to be dependent on immigrants. So that's where we stand.
Tom, is that the case? Is the establishment, so-called, that we're referring to, are they self-congratulatory and persuaded that what they have done is the right thing?
Well, in a sense where I agree with our fellow guest is that we need to focus on the basics of education. I mean, just going back to those OECD figures, out of 79 countries, we're 18th in maths, we're 15th in reading. And I don't think actually the education establishment can just say, well, that's in part to do with the fact that we don't spend enough on education, we don't invest enough on education. Actually, only Norway, Chile and New Zealand is ahead of us in terms of the percentage of our national income we spend on education. And that's included obviously in Scotland that you referenced earlier, where it's been a disaster over the last 15, 20 years with the curriculum for excellence. So there isn't very much to write home about. I think where I part company, from our fellow guest there is that, I don't think the answer actually every time there's a periodic crisis in British education is to look back to the past and say that what we need is a more traditional education. In fact, if you look at, for example, the English national curriculum today, you will see striking similarities with the 1904 curriculum. It's extremely traditional, and indeed it's got even more traditional since Michael Gove was Secretary of State. So I think we need to look in more detail at the nature of the assessment, the curriculum, the fact that children learn in different styles. In my profession, we weren't talking about neurodiversity in education 5-6 years ago. We are now. And I think that relates obviously to issues like the examination system and whether that's fit for purpose for the demands of the 21st century.
Chris, how do you respond to that? It's demonstrably the case that we're in an increasingly technologically dependent world. A world in which children, young people have to learn to be simpatico with computers and technology and the rest. Is it the case that there's, rather than looking back at traditions, is it even worse in a sense? Do we need to start again? Having watched, like you say, you referenced Singapore passing us, lapping us on the track. How do we catch up and get back to where we were?
Yeah, I know I sound very old-fashioned, and people say I'm looking back to a golden age. But what I would say is that if you go to Singapore or Shanghai or Japan or South Korea, they use the teaching methods which we used in the 1950s. So whilst it sounds archaic and old-fashioned, what I say, it's only old-fashioned here. It's not old-fashioned in Singapore. They say, no, you're absolutely right. And I caught a bit of a row 30-odd years ago when we changed the exam system. We got rid of what was then the GCE O-level, and we replaced it with a more all-ability exam, GCSE. But if you go to Singapore, what are they using? Well, they're using the O-level, the old system, which we say is old-fashioned. But we ban it in this country, but we make it in this country at Cambridge, and we export it to our economic rivals. So, yeah, I don't think that education has changed so much. Of course, we need to embrace new technology, but Britain, the UK, is not behind in embracing the new technology. We use it more than most countries in the world. Our children are addicted. It's like educational cocaine. Our kids get masses and masses of the new technology. If you go to Singapore, South Korea, they get some, but they don't get as much. And international research has shown that you can have too much of this addiction to the technology, and it has harmful effects. So I would say we need to draw examples from the past. But when I'm talking about the past, it ain't the past in Singapore. It's not the past in Shanghai. And we come down to one key thing in education. It's about the quality of the teaching and the quality of the teachers. Go to some countries, Finland's an example, which does reasonably well. They recruit from their top 10% of graduates. We recruit mainly from the bottom 20%. We need high-quality people, because I taught for 35 years in all sorts of schools, large comprehensives of 2,000, and also in posh private schools. I've seen the best and I've seen the worst. I've seen the children who've been very working class, hard up, like myself, in fact, my own background. I've seen the poshes of the posh. But ultimately, the only thing that matters is the quality of the teaching. Did you know, for example, according to the OECD, the children of the street cleaners in Singapore, the children of the workers in Singapore, they are ahead, on average, of our kids who go to the poshest of the posh schools. Those kids at the Westminsters and the Eatons and the Cheltenham's Ladies' College, they're behind, or they're no better than, the children of the manual workers in Singapore. You come back to why is that? And part of it, the reason, is because of the teaching methods we use, which are very modern, but they don't work very well. And we work with young offenders in our organisation. We find the prisoners, the young people who are in prison, they are mostly illiterate and innumerate. It is a terrible scandal. And by the way, there's a law of gravity in all of this, and the law is that whatever I say, whatever anybody else says, whatever Michael Gove might say, and I advise Michael Gove and other prime ministers before, I advise various prime ministers before Gove's time. There's one law, and it's immutable in education: the blob always wins. Michael Gove lost, and every other education secretary lost. The only one I worked with, and I've worked with 20 or so over the years, was probably Blunkett. And Blunkett was, I thought, a decent man, did a reasonable job, and he ended up locked in a broom cupboard at the NUT, the National Union of Teachers Conference, for his own safety. It's pretty tough out there, and voices like mine are crushed. Remember, I was someone who moved from the state to the private sector because I was forced out. That's where we are.
Let me broaden this out to my guests here in the studio with me, Emma Burnell. Listening to, that's a very strong case, a very passionate case being made there by Chris McGovern.
Certainly a passionate case.
Would you say there's an ideological problem in our education system? We talk a lot about capture of the institutions. Is there something in the whole approach that has gone wrong in the last couple of generations? Our children are demonstrably falling behind.
I think there is something that's gone wrong in the last couple of generations, but I think Chris and I would disagree radically on what that is. I think that we have got far too invested in measuring how we achieve what are essentially tools. Reading, writing and arithmetic are really, really, really important. And we absolutely have to teach children those things. But they are not, in and of themselves, an education. An education is a grounding in how to be a grown-up. And how to be a grown-up includes imagination and using those tools. And all we've done is focus on league tables and trying to grade ourselves on exactly how many people can pass which phonics level without thinking more and more imaginatively on how they actually use that stuff. And we talked in the last section about asking questions. If we can't teach our kids to ask those questions in the right way, how can we expect them to hear the answers properly?
But Emma Webb, it's obviously not working. You do what I agree. Fundamentally, I agree that you want imaginative children who've been given the basic tools and they have inquiring minds and they can learn, how to think, not what to think. But the children are measurably falling behind and have been for lifetime.
Yeah, I think, one aspect of this is I think that not only at schools but also at universities, we need to find a balance between rigour and creativity, because often I think the education system squeezes creativity out of children and young adults as well. But I think fundamentally our expectations are too low, and not just our educational expectations, but our expectations of how mature children should be by a certain stage. And when we talk about about teaching children to be adults. That's something that should simply be in the environment. They should be taught to be independent individuals and independent thinkers. And I think that fundamentally the issue is, and this goes back to what the gentleman was saying from the Campaign for Real Education, is that our expectations have slipped, that everything, going back to the first segment, that we discussed, condescension, everything has become extremely dumbed down and the expectations of adults is low, never mind the expectation of children.
Tom, if I could come back to you, we're running quite tight to time here. Tom Buick, education specialist. It strikes me that, you know, it's quite often, the case is quite often made that parents have a role in this. But presumably this has been going on for so long, the decline is so dangerously set in that we must now be dealing with the children of parents whose education has fallen so far behind what might otherwise have been expected, that even parents might be powerless to help.
Talk ourselves into a bit of a council of despair. I mean, you know, intergenerational inequality, issues around parenting is not new. I mean, I'm someone that failed actually all my O-levels all those years ago. I was the last year of that cohort. Today I represent the examination boards in my day job, right? So, you know, this idea that there's a sort of fatalism around people's educational destinations is just not the case. But just sort of picking up on comments there from the two Emmas, they're absolutely right. We've got to get this balance right between so-called rigour in the curriculum and creativity. I mean, I'm with the late Sir Ken Robinson, who talked about the need in the 21st century for a real paradigm shift in our education system, in the sense of it was designed in 1870 for the demands of the first industrial revolution, obviously tinged with social, liberal, progressive values, but looking forward to the challenges of the next 50 years in the so-called fourth industrial revolution, that is going to demand huge change to the whole nature of institutions, how people learn, their relationship with those institutions. You know, that is really the big challenge I see coming down the track.
Challenges, there absolutely undoubtedly are. Chris McGovern from the Campaign for Real Education, Tom Buick, education specialist, thank you for your time this evening. After the break, I'll be joined by author Louise Perry, who will be talking about her new book about the sexual revolution.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. As a father of a daughter and two sons, I look out with some trepidation at the world of relationships into which they are, of necessity, emerging. An important new book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry, makes the case, I would say, that generations of women who grew up during and after the heady days of the 1960s have quite simply been let down. Rather than being set free by the revolution, women may have taken one way of putting their needs second to those of men and done little more than swap it for another. Louise Perry joins me now. Good evening.
Good evening. Hello.
Is that fair to say?
Yes, I would say that's a very nice summary.
I read your book all in one go. I read it all in one bite. I was especially struck by a line that we are seeing between many young men and women, a tragedy of mutual incomprehension. And that really resonated with me. I wonder if you could just develop that thought a little.
Yes. I've had a few people say they read it all in one go, interestingly. I don't know if it's quite short, so maybe it's a nice, convenient, bite-sized read. Yeah, so the tragedy of mutual miscomprehension. The argument I make, basically, is that there are some really important sexual asymmetries between men and women, right? So some of them are physical, only women can get pregnant. Men are significantly stronger and bigger than women are on average. That sort of thing. Some of them are also psychological, which is a bit more difficult to say because that's a more controversial claim often. But we know from reams of decades of research data that there are some important average psychological differences between the sexes, including in terms of sexuality. So we know, for instance, that men like casual sex more than women do on average, which is not to say that all men do and all, whatever, but on average, that's quite a marked difference. And it's the sort of thing that you see at the population level. And the argument that I'm making in the book is that given that it is not an even playing field, given that there are these important asymmetries that make women more vulnerable in certain ways, mean that women bear the consequences of sexual encounters in ways that men don't, and also given that men are more likely to enjoy some of the things that have become more socially acceptable post-sexual revolutions, things like casual sex and porn and buying sex and all that kind of stuff, which is presented sometimes as freedom. My argument is actually that oftentimes that comes at women's expense. And I think that to frame that historical change as solely to women's benefit, which is not to say there haven't been some benefits to women, is a mistake. And actually, in general, to see any kind of massive historical event like the sexual revolution as being all a good thing or all a bad thing, is, I think, a really foolish way of looking at history.
I'm asking for a generalisation, I know, but would you say that the younger generation, I suppose I mean by that, I don't know, maybe women from, under 35, I suppose, is that generation now in a better place than the generation that immediately preceded the much vaunted sexual revolution? Or have they just swapped one unhappy place for another?
So they're better in some ways. I mean, my generation are, for instance, better educated. They're earning more, and in the workplace and in education, they're doing better, often doing better than men actually, right up until they have children. But that's another story. In terms of sexuality, I'm not sure that they are, because actually what we've seen, particularly since the turn of the century and the advent of online porn, is this intense pornification of sexual culture, which I think actually has been really damaging to a lot of women and a lot of young men as well. I think that porn is such a malevolent product, because it's not just that it's produced in a really unethical way, but actually the effect that it has on young minds is just appalling. And I think that what we're doing in a way is we're running this unplanned experiment on the world's children, because we know that kids are now seeing porn at the age of sort of 11, 12, sometimes younger. They're watching potentially hundreds of hours of porn before they've even had any sexual relationships in real life. So they're coming to real relationships with all of these sort of images embedded in their minds, and we know that this has an effect in all sorts of really troubling ways.
Emma Webb, an unplanned experiment. Would you concur, agree that something unintended is unfolding before our eyes?
I think, as with all revolutions, anything that the word revolution gets to describe, you end up with unintended consequences, and many of them are, usually quite awful. And so much of what you say rings true, and I'm actually, like Neil, going to be downloading your book onto Kindle this evening to read it, because so much of what you say, I think it rings true with my experience as somebody of the same generation. And I think for me, something that I'm really interested in is the consequences of contraception, particularly hormonal contraception, on society at large, because that is a huge cultural shift that has such profound effects. And if we're talking about the unintended consequences, historically, the unintended consequences of that change to people's lives and the fact that we're having children much later, actually polls suggest that there's a huge amount of dissatisfaction amongst women when it comes to when they're having children and so on. So for me, that is something that, you know, I think even the quote that you used at the beginning there about the mutual incomprehension, I think that there are really deep unintended consequences of the sexual revolution, and I'm so glad that somebody's investigated it more.
Emma Burnell, are we unlearning how to be together?
I think there is an element of that, but there's also, I guess, more options, and for some of us, and for a while now, that's definitely included me, I went down the traditional route. I got married. I didn't have children, but I did the monogamous thing. And he started off with another woman, and then I found my fun. I'm going to just say, I have a lot of casual sex. Some of it's great, some of it's terrible. All of it's my choice. And that has suited me. There'll be a time when I want to settle down and meet someone nice, and then I will stop having lots of casual sex. And there may be that I've closed off options because there are some men who wouldn't want to have a relationship with a woman who's had a lot of sexual partners. They wouldn't be the right guy for me. The point, I think, and I think Louise raises some really very good points, and I think part of the issue is that I sit between the generation of my mother, who was at the forefront of the sexual revolution, and your generation of women in their 30s. I'm exactly between the two. I'm Generation X, where we kind of, in some ways, we didn't have the pornification issue. There was porn, but it was on VHS. It was considerably, or you found it in a bush, bizarrely. No one ever knew why that happened, but it did.
Bushes with people hanging around.
But it's a really well-known phenomenon. I don't know why, but we're getting sidetracked. But so I think we were discovering the effects of the sexual revolution, both positive and negative, but together as boys and girls who were finally seeing each other as equals, I guess. And that seems to have gone away in many ways. And we've gone back to these awful situations which are deeply unfeminist. So I don't think there's a feminist yes, no, should you or should you not behave in a freely sexual manner. I don't think it's about telling other women what to do or not do with their bodies and their partners and what have you, and I don't think that's what you're doing. I think the sexual revolution, when it came in a time when we were deeply misogynistic as a society, and I think in many ways some of that was embedded in that. So I think it's an unfinished revolution at best.
So, Louise, I think if I'm right in my reading of your book, I think you would say that misogynist element is still very much still there. And you paint a very bleak picture of, I think, what you call hookup culture, and you say that it really, it's another means by which men used to get things the way they wanted them in the world before the 1960s, and lo and behold, now men have just found another way to get the things that they want the way they want them, but they've got the compliance of generations of women. Is that fair to say?
I'd say that it's a subset of men. So I wouldn't say that this has been of benefit to all men necessarily, because actually there are lots of young men who are struggling to find any partners whatsoever, and we've got this funny kind of paradox where on that one hand we've got an incredibly hypersexual sort of public life, more so than possibly any time in history. But on the other hand, we've actually got people having less sex than they used to.
Which is a bizarre paradox.
It is odd, isn't it? But I think it sort of makes sense actually to the extent that what we're seeing is a sort of people being channeled by the culture, because this is what I mean about, thinking about this in terms of cultures and networks, and thinking about the thing I get frustrated about sometimes in just talking about sex on the individual level and just talking about choice and is that we are enmeshed with one another. This is the nature of living in a society. Everybody's decisions affect everybody else. And so this idea that we can make a completely free choice I'm sceptical of. And I think that the problem that we're seeing is we used to have a culture where there was huge pressure put on young women in particular to not have sex before marriage, and that was really restrictive on those young women. But I think we've got the same thing. It's just flipped, And you speak to young women now, and they feel as if casual sex is compulsory. It's the thing that you have to go through if you want to get to a monogamous relationship, which actually most women say is what they ultimately want.
At the end of the book, you write very movingly about testimony from a girl, Abby, and how she was in touch, saying that she had started looking at and talking to pictures of herself as a child, and you interpret it as her mothering herself.
Yeah.
Treating her younger self, talking to her younger self as though she was that younger person's mother.
Yes.
And I found that really poignant, as though the revolution has also in some way compromised the bonds between the older generation, the wiser generation born of years.
Yeah.
That's been hauled below the waterline.
And I think that's something that's baked into the idea of progress. I don't call myself a progressive, even though I might agree with some progressives on some things, and even though I work for The New Statesman, which many people consider to be a progressive magazine. I don't like that word because I think that what it suggests is that history is linear and everything just gets better all the time, which it patently doesn't. And I think that one of the problems with viewing it in that way, and particularly the way that feminism is often framed as waves, and sort of each wave gets wiser and has greater insight or whatever, is that it cuts generations off from each other. And it means that young women today, for instance, are kind of primed by that ideology to reject what their mums have to say and to reject what their grandmothers have to say because,
So it's
whatever
almost a
this
rite
is
of
in the
passage
past.
that you have to reject what your mother
Yeah, and everything new must necessarily be better than what's old, and the conservative counterpart to that is to think everything old must be better than everything that's new, right? And I think both narratives are really simplistic and actually really misleading if that's how you're basing your decision making. Because I think that young women have so much to learn from their mums' generations, because these are the women who've lived it.
You do speak very strongly in favour of marriage, though. I feel it would be remiss of me not to...
That's the controversial chapter, yeah.
That you're very strong.
I can give you the flip side on divorce if you like.
You're very strongly of the opinion that that's the lifeboat, that's the safe place.
So I have a chapter where I argue against the very common feminist argument that marriage is necessarily oppressive to women. I think that if what we think of marriage as being is basically just a legal bond between parents and children, thinking of it in terms of what its kind of original function, which is about childbearing, and it is about cementing the responsibilities that the family unit have to one another and protecting the vulnerability, the inherent profound vulnerability of the mother and child early in life. If we think of marriage in those terms rather than as this kind of patriarchal, system of traditions and whatever, then I think actually it is a mistake to think that doing away with that is going to protect women. I think actually the nature of having children, I say this as a mother of a 1-year-old, is that it makes you really vulnerable, and it makes it really difficult for you to participate in the labour market and do all the stuff that you have to do in a modern society. And actually crucially making it so that dads have obligations to the mothers of their children and to their children. I don't think that we can just throw that away.
Louise Perry, I could talk to you for hours about this, or I could listen to you talk about this for hours.
I almost want to clap.
I have to thank you for that, and
Thank you so
we'll
much.
definitely come back to this subject. Stay tuned, there's plenty more to come in the second hour of Neil Oliver Live. I'll see you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
every morning from 6 o'clock. We'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 7 o'clock. This is Neil Oliver live on TV, online and on DAB Plus radio. Plenty still ahead on the show, including a report on that amazing discovery of a sunken warship off the coast of Norfolk. But first, the latest news headlines from Polly.
Neil, thank you. The top stories on GB News this hour. Clarence House says Prince Charles remains politically neutral after he reportedly described the government's migrant policy as appalling. It comes after the High Court ruled the first deportation flight to Rwanda can go ahead on Tuesday. Campaign groups are expected to appeal. But the Times newspaper is reporting that a source heard the Prince of Wales say he was more than disappointed by the policy during a private conversation. Conservative MP John Whittingdale told GB News the plan is sensible and meets all its objectives.
The people who will be sent to Rwanda are young males who are economically active, where there is a shortage in Rwanda. There is not in this country, we have problems being created by the level of migration. In Rwanda, they want to have migrants, and the people trying to get to this country do so because they want to be economically active and to be able to earn money, which they will be able to do. So on the basic policy, I have no great difficulty. I think it meets a number of objectives.
In other news today, the family of Sean Pinner, who was given a death sentence for fighting Russian forces in Ukraine, say they are devastated. He and another British man, Aidan Aslin, were found guilty of mercenary activities by a court in the separatist region of Donetsk. In a statement, Mr Pinner's family described it as an illegal show trial and said he should be given the same rights as a prisoner of war. Meanwhile, Ukraine is going to find out if it has the European Commission support for EU membership by the end of next week. During a visit to the capital, Kyiv, the Commission's president, Ursula von der Leyen, told President Zelensky more work still needs to be done to fight issues such as corruption. The executive's backing would be the first step to joining the EU. All 27 members, though, would have to approve the move. Here, critics of the government's food strategy for England have described a leaked draft as a half-baked blueprint that is flatter than a pancake. They're concerned key recommendations from a major review are being ignored, including the introduction of a salt and sugar tax to help transform the nation's diet. Campaigners also accuse ministers of goading farmers into producing more meat. The white paper is expected to be published on Monday. A pub part-owned by the England cricketer Stuart Broad has been destroyed by a huge fire. Flames could be seen ripping through the Tap and Run in Upper Broughton, with those in charge saying they're heartbroken in a post on Twitter. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue Service says it believes it was an accident. Broad is currently playing in the second test at Trent Bridge against New Zealand. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's back to Neil Oliver.
Thanks for all of that, Polly. Supermarket chains across Britain could soon ask shoppers to stop using cash and even cards in favour of submitting to facial recognition or fingerprints to make purchases. Aldi, Asda, Lidl, Morrison's, Sainsbury's and Tesco already have a trial in place in some stores. Critics say it's another step closer to the cashless society that is a dread for many. Joining me now to help me contemplate this fresh hell is emerging technology consultant Gary Nuttall. Hello, Gary.
Neil, good evening.
Thank you for joining me. I'm going to ask you right off the top, if this goes ahead, what's in it for me? And by me, I mean the consumer.
So the theory is, for the consumer, it makes the whole experience easier. You think about a number of years ago, how you had to take cash with you. To go to a shop, you always had to make sure you had some money. Then there'd be the issue about having change and this kind of thing. Then we moved on. We've got payment cards, but even then you still forget to take your debit card and so on. Then you've got the next generation where everyone's using mobile phones for touchless payments. Again, occasionally, admittedly, it is rare that I can be found without my phone, but it can happen. So the natural thing is that I am my identity. So in some respects, actually using facial recognition or biometrics actually works for the consumer.
But why should you or me or anyone else have to prove who you are in order to buy a paper or a tube of toothpaste?
I don't think you should. And it's a fair point that we are suddenly changing from a situation where you've been able to make payments for whatever you wish in whichever way you wish, without having to prove who you are. All you should really need to be able to prove is that it is legitimate for you to buy whatever. So it's alcohol, for example, that you're a certain age. You shouldn't need to have evidence of who Gary Nuttall is or what his date of birth is. Just, is he old enough to buy it?
Is this biometric transaction, is that what we're into here if this comes forward?
Well, in some ways, we're already there, and people aren't realising it. This is the whole thing with technology. It always happens faster than you notice, although it does usually take longer to actually get introduced. Biometrics can be in many forms. It may be facial recognition, and there are trials going on with that already. There's one actually with schools in Scotland last year. And it's kind of interesting that earlier on in the programme you were talking about education. And in last week's show you were talking about, I think it was children being experimented with having burgers made of insects. So it seems like we actually do a lot of this stuff with children already. And there was an experiment with some Scottish schools in October of last year of using facial recognition for them to pay for their meals in school. That got cancelled after a couple of weeks.
Emma Webb, what does all this, how does it chime with you, this idea?
I despair. I am so horrified by the idea of this, and even the idea that, you know, my money is not my identity. I don't want to be in taking part in economic transactions. There should be no link with who I am as an individual. That's part of our liberty. It's one thing that worries me about the cashless society, but I had to do a double take when I read this story that it's not just cash but also cards. And I'm really resistant to using my mobile phone to pay for things. I've been in restaurants where they've only taken phone payments, and I think that itself is almost a kind of violation of my freedom. If it's legal tender, I should be able to pay with it. And I don't feel comfortable with this movement away from cash, but the idea of using biometrics in economic transactions, I think, is really dystopian.
Really dystopian, Emma Burnell? You for her again?
I think I know I'm supposed to be the dissenting voice, but actually, I really worry that we're putting far, far too much of our society in the hands of a few small corporations, is my worry. And not that I think that that Elon Musk is sitting behind a desk rubbing his hands evilly and plotting, but that their purposes, their bottom line is not my bottom line. And I worry that if we go too far down the line where a few small technology providers can stop us from buying things and can stop us from accessing things that are essential needs, then that could be vastly manipulated in ways that I find quite horrifying, actually.
What do you think, hearing that, Gary? I feel that the freedom to transact trumps freedom of speech. It's a close-run thing, but I think if you can't freely transact, then you can't do anything. And whether you can speak or not falls into second place for me. You know, where is personal privacy in all of this?
I think it's critical, and I agree with the thing that there is the risk that all because we can do things with technology, that doesn't mean we should do. I think absolutely we need to have the conversation at least about whether people will accept it or not. If you speak to children, most children's schools now have got biometrics in the canteen. It's just that they use fingerprint ID. And that's been in place for a number of schools. I would guess about half schools. I actually checked with my local school.
They're already
They're already using fingerprints. And the only reason they stopped for a while was because of the risk of COVID infection with touching surfaces. So it's already been rolled out in some ways. And I think that's quite interesting because if you get to the children early and you get them to adopt it and accept it, they don't even think to question it.
You see, I just don't like, at a fundamental level, the idea of people I can't see and whose motives I don't know, knowing every move I make.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all becoming every train ticket, every journey you make, every sandwich you buy, every newspaper, any service is being tracked and logged and referred back to in real time. And I want to be able to say, you're not entitled to that data and that observation of me unless I explicitly offer it up in return for something else. So what's in it for me?
So I'll probably offer that, my perspective on technology is that we're going down one of two routes. We're either going down centralisation of everything, where there's someone with their cat stroking it away and they've got all information about what you bought from Pret this morning and so on. Or we go down the decentralised route. And decentralised route is what appeals to me, and it's the area I work in at times. So we're talking things like cryptocurrencies, which aren't the same as central bank digital currencies and so on. What they allow you to do is give you the privacy to do what you want to do in terms of transactions.
Do they, though?
They don't, though, do they? I was reading a fascinating article about how actually you can trace Bitcoin back through the blockchain, and it's all right out there. You just have to know how to look.
Yep. And this is the thing that you'll find that law enforcement agencies will keep saying, oh, Bitcoin's dreadful because it's completely anonymous and traceable. Actually, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
It is very traceable if you wish it to be.
But even Bitcoin is almost a violation of people's freedom to, in the sense that people of my parents' generation or older are not going to be able to. I find it very difficult to even understand what the blockchain is, or how to use Bitcoin or how to pay with Bitcoin. So I think that this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, that this is an issue with boundaries. It's almost like we're in some kind of abusive relationship with all of these corporations and the government, that we need to establish boundaries. They have absolutely no right to have, schools have no right to have children's fingerprints on record. Companies have, or the government have no right to have our biometrics on record unless it's for some kind of law enforcement purposes under very specific and restricted circumstances. It's a complete invasion of our right to our right to privacy in the first place, but also it's a complete infringement on liberty, like you were saying, Neil, in the most basic sense. This gives far too much power and to these companies and possibly to the government, and removes power from the individual. The right to transact, as you say, is so fundamental. And I don't think that necessarily, well, I agree, I think cryptocurrency can be very liberating, and I can see the arguments there. But for the older generation, or for people who don't want, you shouldn't have to be obligated to be involved in the technological world in any way. You should be free from the obligation to be part of that. You should be able to exist in the real world with paper money.
Emma Burnell, Burnell, I think you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, just if as we're bringing this back to something we said at the beginning, I would like to add at the moment that the cat-stroking evil geniuses are not actually very clever, because while they do follow your digital footprint around, they're really very stupid about it. Quite often when I've made a big, quite clear, like once-in-a-decade purchase, like a washing machine, I'm then bombarded with adverts for another washing machine. It's like, I really only need one, guys. So at the moment, I feel like society's being saved by the fact that human beings are a bit rubbish.
I am increasingly becoming determined to revert to cash. I mean, I had drifted in a sleepwalking sort of a way into paying for everything with a card, paying for a lot of things with a card. This is pushing me back the other way. And for as long as possible, I'll walk away from any retailer that tries to say I can only pay with a biometric transaction. And for as long as I can, I will use folding money and metal coins to keep my purchases private.
I think it's one of those things with technology, there are good ways of using it and bad. And you can kick back and say, well, I refuse to use this because I don't like it. I hear the same at the moment when people go into stores and say, well, I won't use the self-service checkouts because it's putting people out of work. But they will go to the petrol stations and fuel the cars with petrol. There used to be forecourt attendants, and we don't even think about them now. So I think there is this movement where ultimately, if it becomes more convenient, you will adopt it.
It's an inexorable slide, Gary. Thank you so much for bringing this to us. My hay fever's getting the better of me. It's a topic that is very close to my heart, and I feel sure that we'll see you again, because I want to interrogate this subject further. But Gary Nuttall, emerging technology specialist, thanks for now. Two brothers have revealed their remarkable discovery on the Norfolk coast after keeping quiet for 15 years. Julian and Lincoln Barnwell spent 4 years hunting for the Gloucester, a warship that sank back in 1682. That's more than 340 years ago. It's hoped that the find, which is being called Britain's biggest shipwreck find since the Mary Rose, will help shine a light on British maritime history. Our East of England reporter Ed Crawford has been speaking to the brothers.
From the Norfolk coast, these are the first images of the Gloucester made public. The secrets of the Gloucester have been hidden under Norfolk's waters for hundreds of years until now.
I could just see looming in the distance big black shapes, shadows if you like, on the seabed. Boomf, really excited, obviously wreckage, and literally by another 4 or 5 metres I'm kneeling on the seabed looking at this amazing shipwreck, just in awe. What was so nice is on the day we found it, Dad was out there as well, with us, so all three of us together.
The brothers couldn't be sure whether they'd found what some are calling Norfolk's Mary Rose.
Well, we were both inspired by the Mary Rose. As youngsters, we saw them lifting the hull, and that always stuck in our mind. And I think that's what led us towards looking for older shipwrecks. I mean, there was certainly a moment heading back in of, wow, this could be the Gloucester. We still need to 100% identify it, and it felt like we found her. But it is what next. It is a light bulb moment. There's lots more to be done, and because we're the only people at that particular moment in time who knew where she was. Very, very special. Divers' dreams.
The brothers spent 4 years and covered thousands of nautical miles to find the Gloucester, but a key moment came with the discovery of the ship's bell.
I saw in the distance just a curved shape. Instantly just knew this is, you'd had a double look at it, and you're kind of trained for, your mind's trained to look for these curves, and instantly knew it's the bell. And Julian was disappearing into the gloom, swimming past the bell. I'll try to stop saying that. And he's disappearing into the gloom. I just grabbed his fin, got him back, and I was so relieved. And then we just shared the moment together.
The brothers have discovered many rare objects, and the discovery of the Gloucester has academics and historians excited about what might be next.
The artefacts that are being rescued are unparalleled in their diversity and in terms of their richness. As a royal vessel with very significant political individuals travelling in style, this offers us a time capsule of how that travel took place.
From childhood dream to reality, the Barnwell brothers have found the Gloucester and thus written themselves in the annals of history.
Two brothers from Norfolk discovering a piece of national history. How does it feel?
Wow, it has been a strange build-up because we've kept it to ourselves and close circle of friends for so long, and to tell the world about it now and the nation is just wow, you know, and it's just, as I said earlier, a diver's dream, and it's so nice to be sharing it. But this is just the beginning of the journey, and there's a lot more fun to be had.
This may well turn out to be Norfolk's Mary Rose, but only time will tell if this 17th century ship can be salvaged from the sea. This is Ed Crawford for GB News.
Fantastic stuff. Emma Burnell, stories like that, what strikes me more than anything else is how much remains to be discovered or rediscovered.
Absolutely. I mean, I love stuff like this. My favourite series of books is there's detective fiction all centred around a forensic archaeologist who lives in Norfolk. I bet she's incredibly excited at the moment. I love talking about, we've just come from talking about the future. Now we're talking about the past, and I think there's so much to learn from the past, from our history and our civilization, good and bad, and just exciting and interesting and rich history. And I think it's wonderful that there's still so much to discover. I love to discover something new every day, and I think that we can do something that has so much historical significance, and it's still all out there. That's just wonderful to me.
Emma, we tell ourselves, or other people tell us, that we are an island race, and it's discoveries like this underline again and again that for hundreds, if not thousands of years, this story has very much been about the sea around our coasts and the efforts to trade and to make war around it from the decks of ships.
I have goosebumps even at the thought of the moment when they must have realised that they've discovered it, because not only is that century so fascinating, it's fascinating for exactly that reason, that it was really that period that we were a maritime superpower, and all of the historical connections of the people on board and being able to see it. If I'm sure most people have seen the film Titanic. When I was a child, the bit that gripped me the most, that stuck with me and completely enchanted me, was actually the bit where they were excavating the real Titanic and opening that sludgy safe and with the jewels inside and so on, and that there's just something so magical about the idea that two brothers from Norfolk, that they can take this into their own hands and go on an adventure. It's the perfect story to go and discover this ship off of the coast like that.
I find there's something so wrong in a way about seeing a sunken ship. You know, a ship is all about, you know, being on the surface. And when you see them, you know, lost in that way and lying broken and buried, there's something... you know, they call ships she, of course, and there's very much a sense of it having been alive, and now you're finding it in its watery, in that watery grave. And when you see the pictures of their discovery, the cannon, you think, how on earth did this go undetected for 340 years? You know, the cannon looked like... But of course, you know, in the literal vastness of the ocean, you know, these things are just sometimes covered by sediment, sometimes they're exposed, and it's a whole combination of factors and visibility that turn them up. But, you know, but that feeling that our story will never be finished, but not even the past.
No, the past remains vastly unwritten. And if we think about the past that we do know about, they say history is written by the winners. There's a whole load out there that we don't know that could have been written by the other sides. The other day, I was at the Tower of London at the new immersive gunpowder plot experience.
All right.
And again, that kind of questions, that sort of, you know, which side are you on? You know, was Guy Fawkes a hero or villain? It's very interesting. Yeah. And again, I just think every time we can look afresh at history through our modern eyes, through our modern understanding, but also with a sense of just joy and excitement in who we are and how we got here, I think that's wonderful.
And the fact that Richard, Duke of York, who would be James, Duke of York, who would become James II and 7th, the fact that he had that dramatic escape from that ship on that, in those circumstances, and then the ship is lost, and stays lost for 3.5 centuries.
It's almost like resurrecting the moment
It's
that
the moment.
he fled.
Yeah.
Because there's something, I think there's a reason why, you know, shipwrecks are so enchanting. The idea of the ghost ship.
Yes.
There's something about the idea, like you say, of this ship that is supposed to be above the water, ruling the waves, being this sort of corpse in a cold and forgotten grave, and somehow that can be resurrected in that moment of history when that ship sunk. Because when you see a sunken ship, you can't help but think about the process of it sinking, those cannons falling to the bottom of the ocean, the thing breaking apart, and whatever dramatic event must have taken place in order to put it there. And for it to be lost for all of that time, it makes you feel that... I remember when I was a child that one of the most moving experiences, and I can't even remember which castle it was standing before this castle and feeling that history was in the present, that all of those layers of history were all on top of each other, stacked on top of me in that moment. And I think there's something about the idea of discovering this long-forgotten shipwreck that really makes you feel that the 17th century was resurrected in that moment, and it's just magic.
It just brings back the moment. It brings back that period, it brings back that time, but it also brings back the moment of its loss. People shouting, men swimming for their lives, the ship
You can
breaking
hear
up.
the chaos.
And I think if you think, like, a couple of years ago, there was that craze around sea shanties. I do think there is this thing where salt water slightly flows in our blood, and I think that and that was across, you know, all of races, and you know, we Brexit, non-Brexit, whatever, we were all singing "Long May the Wellerman Come." It was just a lovely moment where we were an island nation, but we were one island all together.
That's right, brought together by the coast that is the hemline that brings it all together. Coming up, we'll be meeting this week's Great Britain. Or is that Great Britons? Have to wait and see, so don't go anywhere.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking to remain breezy with showers, mainly affecting northern and western parts of the UK. Let's take a look at the details. A breezy but mainly fine and dry evening to come across southwest England with plenty of late sunny spells. However, there remains a chance of catching the odd shower. Across southeast England, it will be generally dry with plenty of sunny spells, though there is also a chance of the odd isolated shower. Across South Wales, it's remaining rather windy across the high ground and generally breezy elsewhere, with a mixture of sunny spells and some isolated showers. It's mostly a dry picture across the Midlands with plenty of evening sunshine on offer. It'll remain rather windy and gusty, with an isolated shower also possible toward the north and west. It's a similar weather story in northeast England with strong winds, particularly over high ground. Though there will be some blustery showers, there will be plenty of late sunny spells in between. Remaining rather damp across southern Scotland with showers that could be heavy at times. However, there will be some sunny spells in between. Remaining windy though, this will ease later. For Northern Ireland, there'll be a mixture of sunny spells and frequent blustery showers, some of which could be heavy at times. The showers and wind easing overnight. The showers will continue across northern and western parts of the UK overnight, though winds will slowly start to ease. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in The Big Question, with an explosion in romantic hookups during lockdown, is adultery still wrong, or are open relationships the new normal? Plus, former British tennis ace Barry Cowan on Boris Becker in jail, vaccine-avoiding Rafa Nadal, and can Emma Raducanu win this year's Wimbledon? And in my big opinion, if Prince Charles goes political, I'll campaign for Britain to become a republic. See you at 9.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. When Frankie Ray Tuppenny Hockney was just 3 months old, she was diagnosed with an exceptionally rare disorder, one of just 21 people with microdeletion syndrome, caused by the absence of part of a chromosome. Frankie Ray's family were told she might never walk. However, now 2 years old, little Frankie Ray, who you can hear now from Kidlington, is beating the odds and has been raising money for charity by taking part in a walking challenge. Frankie Ray and mum Mary Ella, dad Ben and sister Georgie Ellen are with me now. So many names, just to make life complicated.
Yeah.
If I can come to you first, mum.
Yeah.
What is microdeletion syndrome?
So she's basically missing part of a chromosome. The chromosome that she's missing part of is chromosome 17.
Okay.
And she's missing a quarter of that chromosome.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's something infinitesimal in the cell.
Yeah.
Is making the difference. And what is the effect of missing a quarter of one chromosome?
With Frankie Ray, it means that she has global development delay. She also has hypermobility. They're not sure whether she'll be able to walk properly unaided on her own.
What do you mean there by hypermobility?
So all of her joints sort of bend underneath and things when she stands. So if you can see, she's got her braces on.
Right.
And her boots.
So our joints are a bit looser, perhaps, than
So if she stands, her ankles may go underneath her legs, sort of go banana shaped sometimes. She's got a little walking frame at home, which she's started to take some steps with.
I don't know, but I tell you what, she looks very with it and together here.
Oh, yeah.
Fascinated. Fascinated, quite so.
Oh, you're pointing.
What if anything caught yours or anyone else's attention? How did you know that there was something
It was just
there?
because it flagged up that her head was on the smaller size. And so they did blood tests and looked into it that way. And then at 3 months old, we found out that she had the microdeletion syndrome. At the time, obviously, because they don't have a lot to say about it, we were kind of just told there was a number to it, given a leaflet from a place called Unique. So they are a database that hold all the information for different chromosomes and deletions.
And Ben, 21, is that 21 people in Britain, or is that 21 people worldwide?
Worldwide. Yeah.
That's an extraordinary
It's incredible.
statistic.
Yeah. We've actually managed to find a few of them online. Well, Ella has.
Because you would want to share
Yeah.
wisdom and experience.
Yeah, because there's no doctors or anything that know too much about this syndrome. Ella's managed to source similar people in the same as us online, on Facebook, of all places.
So it took quite a while to find them.
I bet.
And then I come across a group one day, and there were a few more in England. There's one in Scotland that we know of. There are quite a few in America.
Australia.
In Australia. There's another little girl in Australia who's very similar to Frankie Ray.
Almost identical
Or even to look at facial features as well. Same sort of age.
Incredible.
she's not quite as far forward as Frankie Ray. So even though...
It varies.
Yeah, it all varies. Even though they've got this syndrome, the same syndrome, and they all have global development delay.
We also discovered there's also a, not a deletion, there's also a multiple...
Duplication as well. Yeah, but she has the deletion. So yeah, it depends. Some children or adults are far worse than Frankie Ray, but there are some that are doing more than Frankie Ray.
It does
What are
vary.
you doing?
Georgie Ellen, is Frankie Ray a fun sister? Is she a fun sister to be around?
Yeah.
They have lots of fun. She's a very good big sister to her little sister.
I bet you are.
Yeah.
So tell me, you've been raising money. Tell me about, first of all, the charity and why you got involved and what you're trying to organise there.
The charity basically have helped us, enabled us to get equipment for Frankie Ray that we needed. We needed a specialist pushchair/wheelchair. So I like to say it's a pushchair. And it was rather expensive. So along with the NHS, help from them as well, but the charity have funded the majority of what we needed for that. So we're now just trying to raise as much money as we can to
What is the charity?
It's the Carter Trust.
Carter Trust.
Yeah, they help many disabled children and adults to get equipment, and it has to go through an application process. Not anyone can just go on there and think they can get something, but...
And against what you were told, or the cloud that was hanging over you about not being able to walk, I think Frankie Ray's been...
She shocked us all, I think.
Walking.
Yeah, this last about 3 weeks, she's just started to take a couple of little steps here and there.
Fantastic.
She doesn't like to walk with the boots and the splints on so much. They almost hinder her, but at the same time, if she doesn't have them on, then that's when her ankles give way. That's with her walking frame.
Look, girls, there's some pictures of you. And for people that are listening on radio, we're just looking at pictures of two of the loveliest wee girls just being sisters together.
Brings so much joy to be able to achieve that. It's wonderful.
And just being like sisters everywhere. That's
She was so
lovely
happy.
to watch.
And it's given her some freedom as well. So just even being able to stand with the walking frame. We took her up to school the other day, and I thought she'd go off across the playground. And when she got there, she was just so excited to actually be stood on her own and not penned into something, that she was just over the moon. So it's so lovely to see. We've really seen her come on in leaps and bounds, which is great. She loves to stand. She stands at the furniture, but again, it's just the hypermobility that's stopping her.
Oh, that's lovely. She loves to stand. What a simple, so readily taken for granted action, and yet she loves to stand.
It really
Absolutely.
is.
To be up with everyone is a great sense of achievement for her.
She loves to dance. She loves music.
Oh.
Absolutely loves music. She loves the Wiggles. We watch the Wiggles on.
I think we all have to love the Wiggles
on the TV all day, every day.
So often people, large and small, young and old, exceed the expectations that are suggested by the medical professionals.
Yeah.
I try to have encounters like this every week, and so often it's people who were told the darkest prognosis.
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
And then they go off and they climb mountains and they swim oceans, and
every day is a blessing for us.
And I think when we first got told, when she was 3 months old, it seemed like a massive thing to take on, knowing that she may not talk either. Like, she babbles now and she can say mum and dad. She's starting to make a few sounds. So we're hopeful that she may talk as well. But just the uncertainty of what, of what her life could be like, it's quite hard to understand sometimes and take on board. But
of course,
she's very determined.
Now, so tell me some of the things that you've done for the charity. What have you? Because you've all been involved, have you?
Yeah, we've done lots of different things. So George Ellen's been making loom band bracelets and selling those.
I know about loom band bracelets. My daughter made me loom band bracelets.
Yeah, she's managed to make £161 selling those so far towards the charity, haven't you?
That's superb.
Which is really, really great. It was her idea initially to try and make some money to put back to the charity. So we started with the loom bands, and then we've done several things since. We've done different events.
With raffles.
And had raffles at them. And
I must admit the community have got behind it, and,
definitely.
and fantastic donations from our village and our friends and family.
Are there ways in which I'm sure people watching and listening will be motivated to get involved and offer up some cash? How could they go about doing that?
So we have a crowdfunder page, and it's under Frankie Ray's first steps to success.
There we go.
So yeah,
Frankie Ray's first steps to success.
You can find her on Facebook as well. We've set up a page for her, which is Ultra Rare Ray, because we call her Ray at home.
Okay.
Quite a lot. So, and everywhere on there, we've been posting the crowdfunder, and we've been posting videos daily of her either walking without the frame, taking a couple of steps, or walking with the frame, just to show that she's practicing every day. So it's a win-win for her.
Yes.
She's getting some practice in, but we're also raising money. So she's raised over £400 herself so far through the crowdfunder page. I think in total we've managed to raise over £800 so far.
But doing so much more than that, just through the act of being and doing, means so much more. You know, every week, as you know, as I say, I try to remind people that there are good stories and you know, and people rising above challenges, and that's what we call the Great Britons. You're absolutely that, and I have to say, the four of you and that wee one there looks like a blessing to me.
She definitely is.
I would say, and you, Georgie, Ellen, just lovely. So thank you both for coming in and being with me, and thank you all for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot.
You brought a little beam of sunshine into the studio.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much. We've still got plenty of time left on the show, and after this short break, I'll be talking about one of the world's largest coral reef restoration programmes. Don't go far away.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, June the 8th last week was World Ocean Day. Professor David Smith, a marine scientist from the University of Essex, marked the day by calling for renewed efforts to protect and restore the world's coral reefs. Although those spectacular environments account for just 0.1% of the ocean, they provide homes for a quarter of all marine life. Professor Smith has warned that 90% of the world's corals could disappear by 2042 if no action is taken to deal with damage caused to them. He joins me now. Thanks for joining me, Professor.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, for those that don't know, in brief, what is harming the coral reefs of the planet?
Well, unfortunately, there's lots of things, as you can imagine. If you look on a sort of global context, then the biggest threat, unfortunately, is climate change, and particularly the marine heat waves that we're seeing increasing in frequency and intensity. And that causes spikes in temperature and a phenomena called coral bleaching, which your viewers and listeners might have heard of, and that's having devastating impacts. But on a local scale, there's overfishing, pollution, there's outbreaks of coral disease, and there's, of course, sort of the physical damage caused by non-sustainable coastal development projects. So they're being hit by all sides, really. And, of course, if we don't do anything, as you correctly said, then we really face the threat of losing this incredibly important ecosystem just in the next decade or two. So it's a critical time for their future.
How much of that tiny resource, that 0.1% that they amount to in terms of the coverage of the ocean, how much is perilously damaged already out of 100%?
Well, you're looking at probably 50-60% of the world's corals have disappeared in the last century or so. So, it's not as if we're going to lose 90% in the next 20 years. They're already right on the edge. But certainly the predictions for the next decade looks like the loss is going to accelerate. So we've already done a lot of damage. And what we're seeing now, unfortunately, that even our best protection and sort of leave alone stance, our passive approach to conservation, is not really resulting in the recovery of reefs like we want. Some of the reefs around the world are so damaged they need a little bit more help, and that's really where the restoration project comes in.
I think it's also worth pointing out, isn't it, that as well as being of such importance to marine life, of course, the world's reefs also provide livelihoods for, unexpectedly, for millions of people. I think nudging 1 billion people have a stake in those ecosystems.
Yeah, it's the big shock, really, isn't it? It's quite surprising if you put it in that context. And of course, biologically, they are the sort of life and blood of the oceans. Their health and diversity drive many of the ocean processes, so they're really important in that sense. But there's a human angle here as well. And many of the islands I work on and we work on, they're 100% dependent on reef resources. But if you look more globally, then estimates go up to 1 billion people, certainly more than 10% of the world's population, either get their food directly from a coral reef in terms of fish or crustaceans and the like. Others obviously get a livelihood. Sometimes that can be sort of tourism, other times there's other obviously jobs associated with reefs. And there are also nature's natural seawall defences, particularly for low-lying islands. These are big structures that are naturally produced, that buffer wave energy hitting coastal environments, and will play an important role in preventing islands going under when sea levels rise. So there's a really human element as well as the ecological reason for why we really need to reverse this trend of reef loss over the next decade or so.
I remember reading when it was first brought to light that the Great Barrier Reef was suffering from the bleaching. And then subsequently I remember reading that it was recovering, that there had been a recovery. So when a coral reef is damaged in whatever way, can it come back? Can it regrow, reinstate itself?
It can. It absolutely can. If all the right ingredients are present, then a reef can recover naturally. But it depends on the point of how bad the damage is and how extensive the damage is. And there's certain types of damage where the reef won't recover. And a good example would be if the damage has been so widespread that there's not enough coral biomass to recruit back into the system. Think if you sort of damaged the whole rainforest and left one tree left, it would not be enough to recover the whole forest. And the same goes for coral reefs. Corals repopulate through coral larvae, and you need enough larvae to bring on the next generation, if you like. And the second thing, some of the damage which is caused, particularly in some parts of the world, actually destroy the very fabric of the reef and turn the seabed from a complex reef into a rubble zone, like a rubble desert. And unfortunately, when the coral larvae settle on that rubble, it moves around and kills it, so it doesn't recover. But in certain circumstances, the best approach is to leave it alone and let the system recover. But unfortunately, that's not always possible because the state of degradation is so large now.
You're part of a project called Hope Grows. Tell us about that. It's certainly got an inspirational name.
Yeah, it's a really exciting, fascinating project, and well, you can see it there. The Hope Grows programme started actually with the building of Hope Reef in 2019, a very large structure, around about 50 metres wide, 10 metres height of letters, if you like, spelling the word hope as a start of a restoration project of the entire island, and now we're sort of restoring and emerging that hope. And that Hope Reef initiated a global programme to show the world that you can actually make a difference. You can rebuild reefs in our lifetime. You can see some remarkable results. So the Hope programme goes more global and aims to do the thing, not writing the letters hope, but actually restoring reefs in the critical ecoregions around the world. And in doing so, we aim by 2019 to outplant 2 million corals, restore 185,000 metres squared of reef, and in doing so, training others to do what we do, so we get that snowball effect and raise the capacity, get other people to be involved to have a much bigger impact.
Vitally important attention that you draw to something that affects the whole planet. Professor David Smith, thank you so much for joining me this evening, and I hope our paths cross again in the future.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Listening to that, we were talking earlier about education. It's clearly so incumbent upon us to fix whatever is wrong with education in our society at the moment. Emma Webb, that every week on here is a school day for me. Every time I'm on here, I'm amazed by how much I still need to learn, and surely the necessity to give our next generations the necessary skills to ask the questions, to be aware of what matters, and thereby to do something about it.
I think education is an ongoing process, and so one thing that education should do is equip young people with the skills to go on to be adults who continue to be curious. And I think one aspect of the sort of climate that we see in education, you mentioned earlier those trigger warnings put on for archaeology students that dead bodies might be distressing. We've seen literature students told that Shakespeare might be offensive and so on. That the effect of that is to close minds, and often that is peddled as being something that is actually pro-academic freedom, which I think is a bit of double speak, because actually what it does is it does close people's minds. And I think, as we see there with the story about the coral reefs, and actually your show every single week, you learn something new. And I think that there's something about the magic of the ocean, or the magic of the ship that they found off of the coast, that there's a childish curiosity in all human beings. And the 17th century is a perfect example of that deep curiosity that we have, not only as part of our national character, but also as a species. And I think that's something that should be nurtured, but instead it's being crushed.
That's surely right, isn't it, Emma Burnell, that curiosity. And that curiosity surely is a relatively delicate bloom, so easily damaged, by being shouted down or by being given an orthodoxy. Surely we have to engender a situation where children from the youngest time are open-minded and asking as many questions as they want, and that they continue to do that lifelong.
Lifelong questioning, absolutely. I think that's a really important way of living. I try to learn something all the time. When I went into playwriting, for example, I went and did a course, and it was wonderful. When I did directing, I went and did a course, and it was wonderful. I do think it's important to stress that there are two sides to asking a question. One is asking a question, the other one is hearing an answer. And I think it's really important that while we inculcate that curiosity, we also make sure that we do listen to the answers too. And I think that's what that professor has just really demonstrated, is that knowledge, that an imparting of wisdom has to have open ears too. So we can't just say, well, my job is to ask questions, my job is to ask questions. My job is also to hear answers.
Yeah, I hear that. I think, though, that my experience has been that I learned so much more in the second half of my life, or the second half of my life so far. You know, it was when I started working as a journalist, for example, and then when I stumbled accidentally into television, the amount that I've been exposed to and other people's wisdom that I've been able to take advantage of, you know, has been transformational.
I did my master's considerably later in life, and I remember saying to my course leader, I'm that kind of mature student I hated when I was 19. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I do the reading. I think there is a thing where going back to education at the non-traditional age gives you just such a fresh outlook on it.
And you have to have it from the early stages, don't you? You have to be given the skills. You have to be shown what's possible.
I think that obviously, I think there must be times when you can prise that door back open once it's been shut, but I think it's a lot less likely that you'll learn a lot in later life.
We're running out of time, Emma. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. Thanks, as always, to my panel, Emma Burnell and Emma Webb, and to all my guests this evening. Next up at Smart Dolan tonight, I'll see you same time, same place next week.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in The Big Question, with an explosion in romantic hookups during lockdown, is adultery still wrong, or are open relationships the new normal? We'll speak to a top psychotherapist, a US family values commentator, and adult movie star Brooklyn Blue. Plus, former British tennis ace Barry Cowan on Boris Becker in jail, and can Emma Raducanu win this year's Wimbledon? And in my big opinion, if Prince Charles goes political, I'll campaign for Britain to become a republic. See you at 9.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking to remain breezy with showers, mainly affecting northern and western parts of the